Everyone in the diner saw Dorothy Henderson drop the tray. Everyone heard the crash of breaking plates and the cruel laughter from the businessmen in booth 7. But only one person stood up. Elvis Presley had been sitting quietly in the back corner of Anderson's diner, trying to enjoy a late dinner without being recognized. He was wearing sunglasses indoors, a hat pulled low, and he'd specifically chosen this small Memphis diner because nobody usually bothered him here. He'd watched Dorothy all evening, noticed how she moved between tables with quiet efficiency, how she smiled even when customers were rude, how her hands shook slightly when she carried heavy trays, and when she dropped that tray at 6:47 p.m. on March 14, 1969, when those businessmen started laughing and calling her names, when everyone else in the diner looked away because it was easier than getting involved, Elvis did something that would change Dorothy's life forever. He stood up, walked across the diner, got down on his knees next to Dorothy on that dirty floor covered in broken ceramic and spilled food, and he started helping her clean up the mess. "Don't listen to them, man," Elvis said quietly, his voice gentle. "I bet you're doing the best you can." What nobody in that diner knew was that Elvis wasn't just being kind. He was remembering his own mother, Gladys, who had worked as a waitress in diners just like this one, who had come home exhausted and crying because customers treated her like she was invisible, like she didn't matter, like she wasn't even human. But to understand why Elvis Presley, the biggest star in the world, would get down on a dirty diner floor to help a struggling waitress, you need to know about the night in 1946 when 10-year-old Elvis watched his mother come home from her waitressing shift with blood on her hands and tears on her face. Because that night shaped everything Elvis would become, and it explains why he never ever forgot what it meant to work in service. It was March 14, 1969, a Friday night at Anderson's Diner on Union Avenue in Memphis. The place was packed with the usual Friday crowd, working people grabbing dinner after long shifts, families celebrating paydays, couples on cheap dates. The air smelled like coffee and fried chicken and cigarette smoke. The jukebox in the corner was playing Patsy Cline, and the constant clatter of dishes and conversations created that particular diner symphony that was both chaotic and comforting. Dorothy Henderson had been working at Anderson's for 6 months. She was 42 years old, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, and kind eyes that showed the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept properly in years. She wore the standard waitress uniform, a white dress with a small apron, sensible shoes that were supposed to help with the constant standing but never quite did, and a name tag that said Dorothy in cheerful red letters. What that name tag didn't say was that Dorothy was also a nursing student at Memphis City College, that she worked 3 jobs to pay for her education while raising 2 children on her own, or that she was currently running on 4 hours of sleep and hadn't eaten anything since breakfast because she couldn't afford to waste time on lunch breaks. The evening had been difficult from the start. Table 7, 3 businessmen in expensive suits, who'd come in at 6 o'clock, had been demanding from the moment they sat down. The coffee wasn't hot enough, the water had too much ice, the menu took too long to read. Dorothy had smiled through it all, refilled their coffee 3 times, brought extra napkins without being asked, and tried her best to give them the kind of service that might result in a decent tip. At 6:45 p.m., they'd finally ordered 3 steak dinners well done with all the extra. Dorothy had carefully written down every specification, repeated the order back to confirm, and rushed it to the kitchen. By 6:47 she was carrying their meals out on a large tray, balancing the weight carefully, moving through the crowded diner with the practiced grace of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. She was 3 feet from their table when her left knee gave out. It happened sometimes, a legacy of an old injury from a car accident 5 years ago. Most days she could work through it, compensate with her other leg, keep moving. But today she was tired. Today her body was running on empty. Today that knee buckled at exactly the wrong moment. The tray tilted. Dorothy tried to catch it, overcorrected, and then physics took over. 4 dinner plates, 3 coffee cups, a pot of hot coffee, and $40 worth of food crashed onto the checkered linoleum floor with a sound that seemed to stop time itself. For one horrible moment, the entire diner went silent. 43 people turned to look, and Dorothy Henderson, 42 years old and exhausted beyond measure, stood frozen in the center of that silence, her white uniform now splattered with gravy and coffee, her face burning with shame. Then the laughter started. Not from everyone. Most people looked sympathetic, embarrassed for her. But the 3 businessmen at table 7, the ones who'd been complaining all evening, laughed loud and cruel. "That's what happens when you hire clumsy idiots," one of them said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bet she can't even count change correctly," another added. "Should stick to jobs she can actually handle," the third one chimed in. "Maybe cleaning toilets." Dorothy felt something inside her brain. Not just embarrassment, not just shame, but something deeper. Something that touched every insecurity she'd been carrying for the past 18 months of impossibly hard work. Every moment she'd doubted herself. Every time she'd wondered if she was fooling herself, thinking she could be more than just a waitress. She dropped to her knees and started picking up broken ceramic with her bare hands. The manager, Frank Anderson, rushed over with a mop, his face tight with anger, but not at the businessmen, never at the paying customers, always at the employee who'd made the mistake. "Dorothy, what the hell happened?" Frank demanded. "That's $40 worth of food, plus the dishes, plus the coffee pot." "I'm sorry," Dorothy whispered, not looking up. "My knee. I'm so sorry." "Your knee's been a problem for months," Frank said. "Maybe you need to think about whether you can handle this job." Dorothy felt tears start to burn behind her eyes. She couldn't lose this job. Not now. Not with 48 hours until her tuition was due. Not with everything riding on her ability to keep working, keep pushing, keep going no matter how much her body hurt or how tired she was. That's when Elvis Presley stood up. He'd been sitting in the back corner booth, trying to be invisible. The sunglasses helped, the hat helped, and Anderson's Diner was one of those rare Memphis places where people generally left him alone. He'd been there for about 30 minutes, had ordered the meatloaf special, and had been enjoying the anonymity of being just another customer in a crowded restaurant. But when Dorothy dropped that tray, when those men started laughing, when he saw her on her knees picking up broken ceramic while her manager berated her and customers stared, Elvis felt something twist in his chest. He was 10 years old again, sitting in their tiny apartment in Memphis, watching his mama Gladys come home from her waitressing shift at the diner on Main Street. She was crying, trying to hide it from him, but he could see the tears and the exhaustion and the shame on her face. "What happened, Mama?" young Elvis had asked. "Nothing, baby," Gladys had said, but her voice was shaking. "Just a long day." But Elvis had seen the blood on her hands from where she'd cut herself cleaning up broken glass. He'd heard her crying in the bathroom later that night, and the next day at school when his teacher asked what was wrong because he seemed distracted, Elvis had said, "My mama works real hard and people are mean to her, and I don't know how to help." That was 23 years ago. Elvis was 34 now, one of the most famous and wealthy people in the world. But watching Dorothy Henderson on her knees in that diner, he was 10 years old again. Helpless and angry and desperate to make things right. So he stood up, walked across the diner, and got down on his knees next to Dorothy on that dirty floor. "Ma'am, let me help you with this," Elvis said quietly. Dorothy looked up, startled. At first she didn't recognize him. The sunglasses, the dim lighting, her own distraction. She just saw a kind face and heard a gentle voice. "You don't have to do that," Dorothy said, embarrassed that a customer would see her like this. "I know I don't have to," Elvis said, already picking up pieces of broken plate. "But my mama used to do this work, and I remember how hard it was. So let me help." Something about the way he said it, the genuine kindness in his voice, made Dorothy's defenses crumble. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and they worked together in silence, picking up the mess while the diner slowly came back to life around them. Frank Anderson stood there with his mop, uncertain what to do. The customer helping clean up was unusual enough, but as Frank looked closer at the man in sunglasses, recognition slowly dawned. That profile, that voice, holy hell, was that Elvis Presley? The 3 businessmen at table 7 had gone quiet, suddenly uncomfortable. Other customers were whispering, pointing, and Dorothy and Elvis kept working, picking up broken ceramic and spilled food. 2 people connected by the simple act of cleaning up a mess. When they'd gathered most of the debris into a pile, Elvis stood and helped Dorothy to her feet. Her hands were shaking. There was a small cut on her palm from the broken ceramic. "You okay, ma'am?" Elvis asked, genuinely concerned. Dorothy nodded, not trusting her voice. Up close now. She finally recognized him. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're just someone who knows what it's like to work hard," Elvis finished gently. "What's your name?" "Dorothy. Dorothy Henderson." "Well, Miss Dorothy, how about you take a 5-minute break? Let your manager clean this up. You look like you could use a moment to catch your breath." Frank Anderson, now fully aware that Elvis Presley was in his diner and talking to his waitress, quickly interjected. Of course. Dorothy, take 15 minutes. Take 20. No problem at all." The businessmen at table 7 were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. One of them tried to catch Elvis's attention. "Excuse me, sir. We didn't mean..." Elvis turned to look at them, and his face was cold in a way that made all 3 men shrink back. "You didn't mean to mock a woman who's working hard to serve you? You didn't mean to laugh at her when she had an accident? You didn't mean to make her feel small and worthless for making a simple human mistake?" The silence in the diner was absolute. "My mother worked as a waitress," Elvis continued, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "She worked herself to exhaustion serving people who looked down on her, who treated her like she was invisible, who thought they were better than her because they wore nice suits and she wore an apron. And you know what? She was worth 10 of any of them. She had more dignity, more grace, more humanity in her tired hands than they had in their whole privileged lives." He paused, letting that sink in. "So when you laugh at someone like Miss Dorothy here, when you mock her for a simple accident, when you suggest she's too stupid to do anything else, you're not just being cruel to her, you're being cruel to every person who's ever worked in service. Every mother and father who's ever come home exhausted from serving ungrateful customers. Every human being who's trying to make an honest living and deserves to be treated with basic respect." One of the businessmen opened his mouth to respond, but Elvis wasn't finished. "I suggest you gentlemen apologize to Miss Dorothy, and then I suggest you leave a tip that reflects how sorry you are for your behavior. And then I suggest you think real hard about how you treat people who are working to serve you." The 3 businessmen looked at each other, then at Dorothy, then at Elvis. The first one pulled out his wallet, put 3 $20 bills on the table, way more than the meal would have cost, way more than they'd ever tipped before. "We're sorry, ma'am," he mumbled, not meeting Dorothy's eyes. "We were out of line." The other 2 followed suit, adding their own apologies and their own money to the pile on the table. Then they left quickly, not even waiting for the food they'd ordered. The diner burst into applause. Dorothy stood there, stunned, still processing what had just happened. Elvis turned back to her, his expression softening. "Now about that break. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? I'd really like to talk with you for a minute." They sat in Elvis's back corner booth, 2 cups of coffee between them. Dorothy's hands were still shaking slightly as she wrapped them around the warm ceramic. She'd washed the cut on her palm and put a bandage on it, and she'd tried to clean the stains off her uniform, but the gravy spots were stubborn. "Thank you," Dorothy said finally. "I don't even know what to say. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Elvis said simply. "Miss Dorothy, can I ask you something? And I want you to be honest with me. What made your hands shake so much when you were carrying that tray?" Dorothy looked down at her coffee, debating how much to tell this stranger who happened to be Elvis Presley. Then she decided that after what he'd just done for her, he deserved honesty. "I'm tired," she said quietly. "I work here 5 nights a week, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Then I do a factory shift, Tuesday through Saturday, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., and I clean houses on weekend. Plus I'm in nursing school 3 days a week." Elvis was quiet for a moment, processing that schedule. "That's..." "Miss Dorothy, when do you sleep?" 4, maybe 5 hours a night. I catch naps when I can." "And your family? Husband? Kids?" 2 kids, 13 and 11. "My husband left 2 years ago. It's just me." "So you're doing all this alone?" Elvis, working 3 jobs, raising 2 kids, going to school. "May I ask why?" Dorothy hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper. She handed it to Elvis. It was a tuition bill from Memphis City College School of Nursing. Due date, Monday, March 17, 1969. Amount owed $347. I'm 3 semesters into the nursing program, Dorothy explained. 4-year degree. If I finish, I can get a real job. A job that ties enough that I won't need to work 3 jobs anymore. A job where I can give my kids a better life. But if I don't make this payment by Monday morning at 9 a.m., I'm out of the program. 18 months of work. Gone. Elvis looked at the bill, then at Dorothy. How much do you have saved? $147. I'm $200 short. I've been trying to pick up extra shifts all week, but nobody's hiring. I've asked family, but they're all struggling too. I applied for a loan, but I got denied because I don't have collateral, and the school won't give extensions. Their policy is strict, so you have 48 hours to find $200, Elvis said. Dorothy nodded, and to her horror, she felt tears start to well up. I'm sorry. I'm not usually like this. Today was really hard, and those men, and I'm so tired, and I don't know what I'm going to do if I can't make this payment. Elvis reached across the table and gently touched her hand. Miss Dorothy, I want to tell you something. Something I don't talk about much. When I was 10 years old, my mama was working as a waitress at a diner on Main Street here in Memphis. One night she came home crying, and I asked her what was wrong. She told me that a customer had yelled at her for bringing his order wrong, even though she'd brought exactly what he asked for, and then he'd refused to tip her, and she needed that tip money to buy my school supplies. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I felt so helpless. I was just a kid. I couldn't help her. I couldn't make those people be nicer to her. I couldn't make the money appear that she needed. All I could do was watch her cry and promise myself that one day, if I ever had money, if I ever had power, I would never forget what it felt like to watch my mama be treated like she didn't matter. Dorothy was crying now silently, understanding washing over her. You remind me of her, Elvis said softly. Same tired eyes, same determination, same dignity even when people are trying to take it from you. And I can't help my mama anymore. Miss Dorothy, she passed away 11 years ago, but I can help you. He pulled out his wallet and extracted several bills. He handed them to Dorothy. $300 in cash. This should cover your tuition with a little extra for your kids, Elvis said. And don't say you can't take it. Don't say you'll pay me back. This isn't a loan. This is me making good on a promise I made to my mama's memory 24 years ago. Dorothy stared at the money in her hands, unable to process what was happening. I can't. This is too much. I don't. Yes, you can, Elvis said firmly but gently. You've been carrying the world on your shoulders for 18 months, working yourself to exhaustion, sacrificing your health, and your sleep and your time with your kids, because you're trying to build a better life for your family. That takes courage. That takes strength, and it deserves to be recognized and supported. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Miss Dorothy, there's something I need you to understand. What you're doing, this work you're doing as a waitress, as a factory worker, as a housekeeper, while going to school and raising kids alone, that's not less than what I do. In fact, it's more, because I get applause, I get recognition, I get paid millions of dollars to do what I love. But you work just as hard, probably harder, and people treat you like you're invisible, like you don't matter, like your work has no value. But your work has value. Every plate of food you serve, every table you clean, every kind word you give to customers who don't deserve it, that's the work that keeps the world running. That's the work my mama did. That's the work that deserves respect and recognition and support. Dorothy was sobbing now, months of exhaustion and stress and fear finally releasing. Thank you, she managed to say through her tears. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means. I think I do, Elvis said quietly. And I want you to promise me something. When you finish nursing school, when you're working in a hospital helping people, I want you to remember this moment. And when you see someone struggling, someone working hard but barely getting by, someone who's tired and scared and trying their best, I want you to help them. The way I'm helping you now, not because they deserve it, but because kindness should be passed forward, not kept to yourself. I promise, Dorothy said. I promise I will. They sat together for a few more minutes, talking about Dorothy's kids, her nursing program, her dreams for the future. Elvis shared stories about his mother, about the struggles of his childhood, about why service workers had always held a special place in his heart. Finally, Elvis stood to leave. He put on his hat, adjusted his sunglasses. "Before I go," he said, "I need to talk to your manager real quick." Frank Anderson practically ran over when Elvis called him. "Yes, sir, Mr. Presley. What can I do for you?" "You can start by not blaming Dorothy for what happened tonight," Elvis said. "Her knee gave out. That's not clumsiness. That's a medical issue. And you can make sure she gets proper breaks, time to eat, time to rest. Because if I hear that you're working her into the ground, I'll be back. And next time I won't be so polite." Frank nodded vigorously. Of course, whatever you say, sir." "And Frank," Elvis added, "Miss Dorothy is one of the best employees you'll ever have. Hardworking, honest, dedicated. You should appreciate her more." "I will, sir. I absolutely will." Elvis nodded, then turned back to Dorothy. "You take care of yourself, Miss Dorothy, and good luck in nursing school. You're going to be wonderful at it." "Thank you," Dorothy said again, holding the money carefully. "Thank you for everything." Elvis left the diner quietly, slipping out the back door to avoid the attention his presence had started to generate. But the story of what happened that night at Anderson's diner spread through Memphis like wildfire. Customers who'd been there told their friends. The three businessmen, chastened by Elvis's rebuke, told their colleagues about the importance of treating service workers with respect. Frank Anderson told every new hire about the night Elvis Presley knelt on his dirty floor to help a waitress clean up a mess, and Dorothy Henderson paid her tuition Monday morning at 8:30 a.m., with tears of relief streaming down her face. But the story doesn't end there, because what Elvis didn't know that night at the diner was that his actions would create ripples far beyond one woman's tuition payment. Dorothy graduated from nursing school in December 1970. With honors, she got a job at Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis, working in the emergency room, and she kept her promise to Elvis. Every time she saw someone struggling, every patient who came in without insurance, every family facing impossible medical bills, Dorothy found ways to help. She advocated for payment plans, connected people with charitable resources, and sometimes when she could afford it, she quietly paid bills herself. In 1975, Dorothy became a nursing instructor at Memphis City College, teaching the next generation of nurses. And every year, on the first day of class, she told her students the story of the night Elvis Presley got down on a dirty diner floor to help her clean up broken plates. She told them that story not because Elvis was famous, but because of what he'd taught her about dignity and respect, and the value of service work. She told them that nurses would spend their careers serving others, often doing thankless work for people who didn't appreciate it. And she told them that how they treated people, especially people in service positions, said everything about their character as nurses and as human beings. Real strength isn't about having power over people, Dorothy would tell her students. Real strength is using whatever power you have to lift others up. That's what Elvis showed me that night. He had all the power, all the fame, all the money, and he used it not to make himself feel bigger, but to help someone who was struggling. That's what real dignity looks like. Over her 30-year career as a nurse and instructor, Dorothy Henderson trained over 2,000 nurses, and every one of them learned the story of Elvis and the diner and the broken plates. They learned that nursing wasn't just about medical skills. It was about seeing people's dignity even when they couldn't see it themselves. It was about helping people in their most vulnerable moments without making them feel ashamed. It was about recognizing that everyone's work has value, regardless of whether they're a doctor or a housekeeper or a waitress or a factory worker. In 1992, Dorothy received the Memphis Nursing Excellence Award for her contributions to nursing education. At the ceremony, she was asked to give a speech. She stood at the podium, 65 years old now, her hair completely gray, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. "I want to tell you about the night I met Elvis Presley," she began. "Not because he was famous, though he was, but because of what he taught me about respect." She told the story in full, holding nothing back. The exhaustion, the accident, the cruel laughter, the moment Elvis stood up when everyone else looked away, the money that saved her education. the promise she'd made to pass kindness forward. Elvis Presley taught me that how we treat people in their worst moments defines who we are, Dorothy said. He taught me that service work is honorable work, that struggle deserves support, not judgment, and that real kindness means getting down on the floor with someone instead of standing above them. She paused, looking out at the audience of nurses and doctors and hospital administrators. I've spent 30 years teaching nursing students, and I've tried to teach them what Elvis taught me, that everyone deserves dignity. The homeless patient who comes in smelling bad, the drug addict seeking help, the scared teenager with a shameful secret, the elderly person who can't afford their medications. Every single one of them deserves to be treated like they matter. Because they do. The audience rose in a standing ovation. But Dorothy wasn't finished. I have one more thing to say. To anyone in this room who works in service, any position, I want you to know that your work matters. You matter. And if anyone ever makes you feel like you don't, if anyone ever treats you like you're less than human because of the work you do, I want you to remember that Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, thought service work was important enough to get down on a dirty floor and help a struggling waitress clean up broken plates. She held up a framed photograph, one that had been taken by a customer at the diner that night without anyone knowing. It showed Elvis on his knees, helping Dorothy pick up broken ceramic, both of them focused on the work, oblivious to the watching crowd. This picture has hung in my office for 22 years, Dorothy said. Not because it shows Elvis being kind, though it does, but because it reminds me every single day that the most powerful person in the room that night chose to use his power to serve, not to dominate. He chose humility over pride. He chose kindness over indifference. And he changed my life by simply treating me like I was worth helping. When Dorothy died in 2005 at the age of 78, her obituary mentioned her nursing career, her 2 children, her 6 grandchildren, and the thousands of students she'd trained. But it also mentioned the night in March 1969 when Elvis Presley stood up in a diner because nobody else would. Her daughter, Margaret, spoke at the funeral. "My mother never forgot that night," Margaret said, "and she never let us forget it either. Growing up, whenever we complained about anything, whenever we felt sorry for ourselves, she would tell us the story of Elvis and the diner. She'd say, 'You can either look away when people are struggling, or you can stand up and help. That's the only choice that matters.'" The photograph from the diner, the one showing Elvis and Dorothy on the floor picking up broken plates, was donated to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It hangs there still with a placard explaining its significance. The placard doesn't talk about Elvis's music or his fame or his movies. It talks about character. This photograph, the placard reads, captures what fame and success should be used for: lifting others up. On March 14, 1969, Elvis Presley was presented with a choice. He could look away from a struggling waitress, like everyone else did, or he could stand up and help. He chose kindness. He chose dignity. He chose to remember where he came from and use his position to help someone who reminded him of his mother. This is Elvis Presley's real legacy, not his music, though that was extraordinary, but his humanity. Today, that photograph hangs at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a testament to what it means to have character. Thousands of people see it every year. They read about Dorothy Henderson, who became a nurse and trained 2,000 others. They read about the $300 that changed one woman's life and created ripples that touched thousands more. They read about a night when the biggest star in the world got down on a dirty floor because he remembered what it meant to struggle. And maybe, just maybe, some of those visitors leave thinking about their own choices, about the times they could stand up or look away, about whether they use whatever power they have to lift people up or keep them down, about whether they see service workers as invisible or as human beings deserving of dignity and respect. Because that's what Dorothy Henderson taught her nursing students for 30 years. That's what Elvis Presley showed the world on March, and that's what we all need to remember every single day. Real character isn't about what you do when everyone's watching and applauding. Real character is about what you do when nobody would blame you for looking away. It's about standing up when it would be easier to sit down. It's about helping when it would be more comfortable to ignore. It's about remembering where you came from and using that memory to make sure others don't have to struggle alone the way you once did. Dorothy Henderson worked as a waitress for 6 more months after that night. saving money while she finished nursing school. Every shift she carried Elvis's words with her. Your work has value. You matter. And whenever customers were rude or dismissive, whenever she felt invisible or worthless, she remembered the man in sunglasses who'd gotten down on the floor beside her and treated her with the dignity that everyone deserved. On her last day at Anderson's diner in September 1970, Frank Anderson called all the staff together. He'd arranged a small going-away party, with cake and coffee and heartfelt speeches about what a wonderful employee Dorothy had been. But the real surprise came when Frank handed Dorothy an envelope. Inside was a letter, written in handwriting Dorothy recognized from the autograph Elvis had given her that March night. It said, "Miss Dorothy, I heard you're graduating soon. Congratulations on finishing what you started. You earned every bit of that education, and you're going to be an amazing nurse. Remember, kindness always matters. Use your skills to heal bodies, but never forget to heal hearts too. That's what my mama would have wanted. That's what the world needs. Yours truly, Elvis Presley." Below the letter was another $300 in cash with a note. For your first month's expenses as a working nurse. You shouldn't have to worry about money while you're starting your new career. Consider it an investment in all the people you're going to help. Dorothy stood in the break room of Anderson's diner, surrounded by coworkers who'd become friends, holding that letter and that money, and she understood something profound. Elvis hadn't just helped her that night in March. He'd continued to watch over her, to make sure she succeeded, to invest in her future because he believed in what she could become. That kind of generosity, that kind of sustained caring, wasn't about a single grand gesture. It was about following through. It was about actually caring what happened to people after the cameras stopped rolling and the applause died down. It was about treating people like they were worth the investment. Not just once, but consistently, over time. Dorothy kept that letter for the rest of her life. It hung on her office wall next to the photograph from that March night, and when her nursing students asked about it, as they always did, she would tell them the full story. Not just the dramatic moment in the diner, but the letter and the continued support and the way Elvis had treated her, not as a charity case or a photo opportunity, but as a human being worthy of dignity and respect. That's what separates real kindness from performative charity. Dorothy would tell her students, real kindness follows through. Real kindness doesn't just help once and walk away. Real kindness invests in people's futures, believes in their potential, and supports them until they can support themselves. In her final lecture before retiring in 1995, Dorothy Henderson stood before 100 nursing students and told them the Elvis story one last time. She was 68 years old, tired but satisfied, ready to hand the torch to the next generation. "I've told you this story every semester for 20 years, she said. "Some of you have heard it so many times you could recite it yourself, but I keep telling it because it's the most important lesson I can teach you about nursing, about service, about being human." She held up the photograph and the letter, artifacts from a night 26 years earlier that had changed everything. Elvis Presley didn't have to help me. He could have ignored the whole situation. He could have left the diner and never thought about the clumsy waitress again. But he stood up because he understood something that I need all of you to understand. We're all connected. Your dignity is tied to my dignity, is tied to everyone's dignity. When we allow people to be dehumanized, when we allow service workers to be treated as invisible, when we allow anyone to be mocked for their honest work, we diminish all of us. She paused, looking at the young faces before her, hoping they truly understood. You're about to become nursing. You're going to have power over vulnerable people, patients in pain, families in crisis, people at their absolute lowest, and you'll have a choice every single day about how you use that power. You can use it to make people feel small, to assert your authority, to remind them that you're the professional and they're the patient. Or you can use it the way Elvis used his power that night, to lift people up, to preserve their dignity, to help them remember that they matter. Choose dignity.